Have you ever wondered how some people command a room without uttering a single word? They don't raise their voice, they don't explain themselves, they simply retreat, and suddenly the energy shifts. People pay attention, they lean in, and those who once took them for granted begin to panic. Now imagine if you chose to do the same. Imagine if, instead of always explaining, reacting, or rushing to be available, you simply stopped. You became quiet, unpredictable, selectively absent. What would change? Everything. Because the moment you stop being emotionally and energetically accessible to everyone, the dynamic between you and the world begins to unravel. And that's not a bad thing. That's the beginning of freedom. Carl Jung once said, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to a better understanding of ourselves." And here's the catch. What irritates others when you stop reacting? When you stop responding to emotional bait? When you start choosing silence instead of drama? That's where the mirror begins to crack. And when it does, what's reflected is not you, but the emptiness in others they've long been trying to avoid. From a young age, we are taught to be good, to be kind, to say yes even when we feel no. We're taught that our worth is measured by how quickly we respond, how much we give, how available we are. And this conditioning becomes a cage, one that's disguised as virtue. But here's the truth, no one tells you. Excessive availability is not compassion, it's compliance. It's often a silent way of trying to earn love that should never have required payment. Every time you say yes out of guilt, every time you explain yourself just to avoid disappointing someone, every time you answer a message that drains you, you are leaking energy. Carl Jung described the human psyche as a dynamic energy system. Every reaction, every thought, every emotional investment consumes that psychic fuel. Now ask yourself, are you choosing where your energy flows? Or are you simply bleeding it out for others who never refill your cup? People who benefit from your over-availability will never ask you to change. Why would they? You make their life easier. They press a button, you respond. But what happens when the button stops working? They panic. They criticize. They guilt you. Not because you've done something wrong, but because you've stopped playing the role they assigned to you. Jung called this the persona, the social mask we wear to be accepted. And the more you wear it, the more you disappear from your own life. Silence is not passive. It's not weak. In fact, it's one of the most misunderstood forms of communication. When you stop explaining, defending, reacting, when you become unavailable to emotional chaos, people notice. Not because you're absent, but because your presence is no longer being handed out like a free sample. You begin to feel the discomfort of guilt, the sting of being misunderstood. But slowly, that silence transforms into something else. Clarity. Carl Jung believed that true individuation, the process of becoming your authentic self, requires a separation from the noise of the collective. And silence, when chosen consciously, is that separation. In silence, you begin to see the patterns, the emotional triggers, the loops you've repeated your whole life. You begin to see who only comes to you in crisis, who only values you when you're convenient, and who disappears when you stop playing savior. And that's when the inner shift happens. You no longer need to win arguments. You no longer crave approval. You no longer rush to explain your decisions. Instead, your silence becomes a boundary, a signal, a declaration that your energy is yours to manage, and not everyone is invited. True silence is presence. It's choosing to hold your power rather than spend it trying to fix what others refuse to face in themselves. Why do we keep giving so much? Why do we respond to messages we dread, continue conversations that exhaust us, and stay in roles that drain us? Because deep down, we fear being unloved, rejected, abandoned. Jung said, "We do not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." And part of that darkness is the realization that much of our people-pleasing is not kindness, it's fear. Fear of not being enough unless we're useful. Fear of being left unless we perform. And so we betray ourselves, one small compromise at a time. But there's a turning point, a quiet moment when you feel that deep fatigue, not just physical, but spiritual. You realize you've been trading your peace for belonging, and the currency is your soul. And that's when you start to pull back, not out of resentment, but out of reverence for yourself. You begin to say no without explanation. Leave a message on read, guilt-free. Walk away from arguments you used to feel compelled to win. Choose rest over proving a point. And yes, this will confuse people. They'll say you've changed. They'll accuse you of being cold, but that's not your burden. Because when people can't access the version of you they used to control, they call it selfishness. But what they're really seeing is your sovereignty. You are no longer available for emotional games, no longer accessible for manipulation, no longer showing up to battles you never signed up for. And that, my friend, is power. When you first begin to withdraw, when you stop being endlessly available to everyone around you, it doesn't feel powerful at all. In fact, it can feel terrifying. Doubts creep in, guilt surfaces. You wonder, am I pushing people away? Am I being too harsh? Will they think I've changed? And yes, they will, because you have. You'll start to notice something unsettling. The ones who seem to love you most begin to disappear. But what you slowly realize is, they didn't love you. They loved the version of you that said yes all the time. The version that dropped everything to rescue them. The version that never questioned the cost of being endlessly accessible. But here's the turning point. If you allow yourself to stay in that silence, if you resist the urge to rush back into the noise just to feel connected again, something beautiful and unshakable begins to unfold. You begin to meet yourself, not the self that responds on command, not the self that performs for love or approval, but the self that simply exists, fully, authentically. In that sacred silence, your inner voice starts to rise above the static. You hear it clearly for the first time. You begin to feel your own natural rhythm, what energizes you, what drains you, what truly matters. This is what Carl Jung meant when he spoke of the solitude required for individuation. It's not about isolating from the world out of fear. It's about returning to yourself with reverence. It's a solitude that rebuilds, that reconnects, that reveals how much of your identity was shaped by other people's expectations. And in that space, something even deeper returns. Your energy. Your intuition grows sharp again. Your presence becomes magnetic, not because you're trying to be seen, but because you've stopped chasing it altogether. You begin to move differently, speak less, but with more weight. You no longer argue to be understood because your peace speaks louder than your words ever could. People who genuinely care for you will adapt to this new version of you. They'll respect your boundaries. They'll meet you at your new level. But others, the ones who only came for what you could give, will quietly drift away, and that's a gift. Because from that silence, you emerge stronger, not louder, not tougher, just whole. So ask yourself, who truly deserves your presence and who simply depended on your absence of boundaries? This isn't selfishness. This is self-respect. And the moment you stop being available to everyone, you become unshakably available to yourself. And that changes everything. If something in this message struck a chord with you, if you've ever felt like you don't quite fit in, like your silence unsettles others or your clarity isolates you, then maybe you've already started the journey inward. Maybe you've already begun stepping out of the roles others placed on you. But now that you're no longer available in the same way, what does that say about how society sees you? Why do people fear those who choose solitude, who speak less but think more, who won't conform to emotional games. To understand this deeper, watch the previous video, Why Intelligent People Scare Society, and what it reveals about us all. It might just explain why your evolution makes others uncomfortable, and why that's not a weakness, but a sign of real inner strength. Let's continue the journey there.